Welcome to Golden Story for Sleep, your night refuge to relax, get inspired, and transform your mind. Here, each story is carefully created to calm your heart, open your mind, and plant seeds of prosperity while you sleep. Inspired by the teachings of Esther and Abraham Hicks, we combine powerful messages from the law of attraction with mental reprogramming techniques so that you wake up every day more confident, lighter, and ready to attract what you want. Now, take a deep breath, settle down, and let this story guide you to a night of peace and abundance. Before you drift off into sleep, I'd like to ask you something simple. Subscribe to Golden Story for Sleep. When you do this, YouTube understands that these stories matter to you and will show you more content that feeds your mind with prosperity and abundance every night. Together, we can create a powerful habit, ending every day with thoughts that transform your life. The rain had stopped just before sunset, leaving the air cool and fragrant with the scent of wet earth. Soft golden light stretched across the narrow streets, slipping through the cracks between weathered buildings and dancing over cobblestones. In that softened hour between day and night, a man walked home slowly, his worn leather shoes making faint, deliberate sounds on the pavement. He carried no umbrella, though a few drops still slid lazily from the edge of his hair onto the collar of his shirt. His hands were tucked into his coat pockets, fingertips brushing against something unexpected, a sealed envelope, thick and smooth, as if it had been placed there without his noticing. He paused under the glow of a street lamp, pulling it out. The paper felt warm, almost alive, with a faint, intricate embossing of a crescent moon. There was no return address, no name, only his own written on the front in a flowing script he did not recognize. He hesitated for a moment before breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet, cream-colored and scented faintly of sandalwood. The words were few, but they stirred something in him. Tonight, at the 12th bell, come to the house on the hill where silence speaks. Bring only your open mind. The door will be unlocked. He read it again, his heart slow but steady, as if it already knew the way. The message felt less like an invitation and more like a reminder of something he had agreed to long ago. By the time he reached his apartment, the sky was a tapestry of deep indigo and early stars. He set the letter on the table, but its presence filled the entire room. The ticking of the clock seemed louder. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. Everything in him leaned toward the idea of going. He prepared with unusual care, choosing clothes that felt comfortable yet quietly dignified. A dark wool sweater, clean trousers, polished shoes. At 11, he left his home, the city unusually still. The streets leading uphill were narrow and winding, bordered by low stone walls overgrown with ivy. The higher he walked, the more the sounds of the city dissolved into a velvety silence, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind in the trees. The house appeared suddenly as he turned the last curve, tall, with whitewashed walls that seemed to glow softly under the moonlight. Its windows were lit with a steady amber glow. He approached the heavy wooden door, its surface carved with patterns of leaves and waves. It opened soundlessly at his touch. Inside, a wide hallway stretched forward, lined with candles in glass holders. The air smelled of honey and cedar. His footsteps were absorbed by the thick woven rugs. He felt no fear, only a curious sense of belonging. The hallway led to a large room where a long table was set, though not with plates or cutlery. Instead, crystal bowls of various sizes were arranged down its length, each resting on a soft cushion. Around the table, people sat quietly, their eyes calm, their bodies relaxed but alert. No one spoke. They simply waited. At the far end of the room, a figure stood, a tall man in loose linen clothing, his hands resting gently on the edge of the table. Without a word, he struck the rim of one crystal bowl with a padded mallet, releasing a tone that shimmered through the air like light, turned into sound. The vibration seemed to move through the listener's chest, loosening knots of tension. Another bowl was struck, its pitch higher, weaving with the first into a slow, spiraling harmony. As the tones expanded, a voice began to speak, soft, deliberate, each word placed as if it had weight. The man could not see where the voice came from, but it felt as if it was speaking directly inside his mind. Every thought is a seed. The voice murmured, and the soil is always ready. Choose with care. Choose with joy. The roots grow whether you watch them or not. The sounds and words folded into each other, creating a kind of ocean in his mind. Felt old beliefs, ones that had been heavy and unquestioned, loosen, like stones sinking out of sight. The voice spoke again. There is no shortage. There is only flow. What you hold in your heart is what gathers around you. He closed his eyes, letting the tones vibrate through him. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw faint shapes, not clear images, but impressions of golden light curling through open doorways, of rivers widening without end, of his own hands receiving more than they could hold. When the voice paused, the silence that followed was not empty but full, as if every particle in the room hummed with a quiet truth. The bowls rang again, and again the voice came, guiding thought into soft, expansive spaces. Minutes or hours passed. He could not tell. When he opened his eyes, the table seemed brighter, the air lighter. He glanced at the others, and though they had not spoken, he felt as if they all shared a secret that had no need for explanation. And so the night continued. The sound and the silence, teaching without teaching, until the first hint of dawn pressed gently against the windows. The first rays of daylight touched the windows like cautious fingers, painting the wooden floor with strips of pale gold. The man opened his eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream that still lingered in the corners of his mind. For a moment, he was unsure if he had slept at all. His body felt both rested and alert, his chest light as though a weight had been quietly lifted in the night. He lay still, listening. The city had returned to its morning rhythm, the distant rumble of a tram, a street vendor's voice calling out fresh bread, the soft clinking of a neighbor's teacups. But beneath those familiar sounds, there was something new, a subtle undercurrent, as if the world itself was humming with possibility. He rose slowly, each movement deliberate, aware of the quiet strength in his limbs. In the bathroom, the mirror reflected a face he had seen countless times before, yet it felt different now. Not younger, not changed in any obvious way, but carrying a calm certainty. His eyes lingered on his own reflection longer than usual, as though searching for a clue. In the kitchen, he prepared tea, letting the steam curl up toward his face. He noticed how the light filtered through the curtains in delicate patterns. How the scent of the tea leaves rose gently before fading into the air. Everything felt sharpened, alive. He took a slow sip, savoring it, and found himself smiling without knowing exactly why. The envelope from the night before still rested on the table. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was just paper now. No warmth, no faint vibration, yet holding it brought back the sound of the crystal bowls. The voice speaking of seeds, of flow, of the invisible gathering around the heart. As he stepped outside, the morning greeted him with crisp air and the faint scent of rain, still clinging to the stone walls. The street was brighter, as if polished overnight. He began his walk without hurry, noticing details he often ignored, the uneven texture of the cobblestones under his shoes, the way a shutter creaked open on the second floor of a nearby building, the smile of a woman arranging flowers outside her shop. He passed the bakery on the corner and stopped, not because he was hungry, but because the smell of fresh bread seemed to draw him in. Inside, the baker, a man he had known for years, handed him a small loaf without asking for payment. "For you," the baker said simply, with a nod. "Fresh from the oven." The man accepted it, warmth seeping into his hands from the crust. He felt an impulse to question the gesture, but instead allowed it to settle inside him as a quiet exchange, a small proof that what is given without resistance returns without effort. Further down the street, he paused at a small bookshop he rarely entered. Something in the window caught his eye, an old leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth. Without thinking, he stepped inside. The air smelled of paper and dust, and the shopkeeper greeted him with a slow, knowing smile. "That one's been waiting," the shopkeeper murmured, handing him the journal. Inside, its pages were blank, yet they carried a faint scent of sandalwood, the same as the letter. He bought it, tucking it under his arm, feeling again the echo of the voice from the banquet. Every thought is a seed. It seemed natural now to write, to let his own words plant something in the unseen soil. As the day unfolded, the world seemed to align in small, quiet ways. A delayed tram arrived just as he reached the platform. A stranger held the door open for him at a cafe. The coins he found in his coat pocket were exactly enough to pay for his tea. Each event was small, easy to overlook, yet together they formed a pattern, a gentle weaving, like invisible threads pulling the edges of his life closer to something whole. By the time he returned home in the late afternoon, the journal called to him. He sat at his desk, opened to the first page, and began to write. Not a plan, not a list of goals, but words that felt like they came from somewhere deeper. "I live in a river that never runs dry. I am carried by currents that know where I am going. All that I seek is already seeking me." The pen moved without effort, each sentence falling into place as naturally as breath. He did not stop to analyze or judge, simply allowed the flow to continue. Outside, the day began to soften into evening, shadows stretching long across the floor. Somewhere in the city, bells chimed the hour, their sound clear and steady. The memory of the previous night returned, the bowls, the voice, the gathering of strangers in silence. He wondered if there would be another invitation, and even if there wasn't, part of him knew the banquet had not truly ended. It had simply moved inside him. The next morning arrived, softly, with a pale mist curling around the rooftops. The man awoke before the sun, the air still carrying the cool stillness of night. He sat at the edge of his bed for a moment, listening, not for sounds outside, but for something inward, a quiet rhythm that seemed to guide him now. The journal lay open on his desk, exactly as he had left it. The ink on the page dried to a deep, soft brown. He reached for the pen without hesitation, as if the day could not begin until he wrote. The first words came without thought. I open the door to what is already mine. It steps in without knocking. The sentence surprised him. He let it stand, not trying to change it. More words followed, like small stones skipping across a calm lake. By the time the sun lifted fully, he was ready to leave the apartment. The streets were waking slowly, the sound of shutters being unlatched, a cart rolling over cobblestones, the far-off bark of a dog. He walked toward the market, drawn not by need, but by the feeling that something there was waiting. The market was alive with color, baskets of oranges glowing like captured sunlight, fabrics swaying in soft breezes, jars of honey catching the light in golden prisms. He moved between the stalls, greeting familiar faces, until he stopped at one he didn't recognize. A woman stood behind the table, her eyes warm and steady. In front of her were small glass bottles filled with what looked like ordinary water, each sealed with a cork. What are these? He asked. Reflections, she replied. They hold what you see when you stop looking for it. He smiled at the strangeness of the answer, yet something in her tone made it feel perfectly reasonable. He picked one bottle up, noticing the way the light refracted through it. For a brief moment, he saw, or imagined he saw, scenes inside. It himself standing in a field of tall grass, pockets full of gold coins. Himself walking through a city where every face smiled in recognition, without asking the price. He bought the bottle and slipped it carefully into his coat pocket. The day unfolded in the same effortless pattern he had begun to notice. The rhythm of small alignments. A seat opened for him on a crowded tram. A colleague he barely knew offered to introduce him to someone whose work he admired. A letter arrived with unexpected good news about a debt that had been quietly erased. That evening, he returned home earlier than usual. He placed the glass bottle on the windowsill where the setting sun could touch it. The light danced inside it, throwing tiny glimmers across the wall. He found himself speaking softly into the room, not to anyone in particular. Everything I need is already moving toward me. I meet it halfway. The words felt like a continuation of the banquet, not a memory now, but a current running through his days. Later, as the sky deepened into night, he boiled water for tea and sat near the window. From somewhere far below, he heard a faint melody, perhaps a violin, perhaps just the wind catching on metal. It wove into his thoughts like a reminder. Life did not need to be pushed. It needed to be allowed. When he went to bed, he placed the bottle on the table beside him. As sleep approached, he imagined the liquid inside, carrying not just light, but possibility, clear, abundant, infinite. He pictured it spilling gently into his life, not all at once, but steadily, like rain soaking the roots of a tree, and, just before his breathing slowed, he felt it again, the invisible threads, pulling quietly, drawing something closer. Morning light entered his room like a slow tide, touching first the floorboards, then the edge of the desk, then the curve of the bottle on the nightstand. He woke, not because of the light, but because of a feeling, that soft certainty, that something was unfolding, even now. He rose without hurry, the wooden boards creaking beneath his bare feet. The air held, that faint chill, just before warmth arrives. He made tea and stood by the window, watching the city stretch itself awake, shutters swinging open, curtains fluttering, a paperboy tossing folded pages onto doorsteps. When he picked up his journal, he didn't think. He wrote, "Today, I walk as if the ground itself leans toward me." The words felt like a step taken before his foot had touched the earth. That day at work, his conversations seemed to open like doors. A man he had spoken to only once before stopped him in the hallway and mentioned a project in need of someone with his exact skills. It might be nothing, the man said, but it could also be something. At lunch, he sat in a small cafe with a view of the street. He sipped his coffee slowly, not reading, not looking at his phone, simply letting his mind drift. Across the street, a young boy tried to sell flowers to passersby. Most people walked past without noticing, but one woman stopped, bought 3, and placed one in the boy's pocket before walking away. The man felt a quiet echo of the banquet. In that gesture, the giving that fills both hands. In the late afternoon, he decided to walk home instead of taking the tram. The streets wound upward, past familiar shops and stone steps worn smooth by years of use. He passed an antique store he had never entered before. The bell above the door gave a single clear note as he stepped inside. The shop was dim, dust turning. In golden shafts of light, old books leaned on one another like friends telling secrets. A large clock ticked faintly in the corner, though its hands had stopped, looking for something. The shopkeeper asked, without looking up from the counter. "Not exactly," he replied, "just seeing what's here." The man's hand rested on a small wooden box with a brass clasp. He opened it. Inside, nothing but a piece of folded paper. The paper read, "You already own the thing you are looking for." He closed the box gently and smiled. That night, his apartment felt different. The bottle on the windowsill glimmered, even without light, as if something inside it had learned to shine on its own. He sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, and let the quiet wrap around him. He remembered the banquet, the crystal bowls, the ringing chimes, the voice that had spoken without hurry. Only now did he realize the voice had never truly stopped. It had simply changed rooms. He thought about the unseen current he had begun to feel, the way meetings appeared without planning, the way small moments folded into each other like pages in a book written just for him. "I am in the banquet now," he whispered, "and I was always here." Sleep took him as if it had been waiting in the next room, and in his dreams there was no hill, no house, no long table, only the open space of a life leaning toward him, carrying more than enough. The night was unusually calm, as if the air itself had been holding its breath in anticipation. The moonlight spilled over the narrow cobblestone path, each stone glistening faintly as though it had been polished by unseen hands. The man walked slowly, his leather shoes tapping softly against the stones. In his right hand, he held the invitation, a simple ivory card. No name, no sender, just a golden imprint of a hill crowned by a house. It was this image that had been haunting his thoughts for days. The air was cool, crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine and something warmer, almost like cinnamon. He adjusted his coat around his shoulders, not out of cold, but from a strange, pleasant shiver that seemed to come from within. The hill rose before him, lined with old oaks, whose leaves whispered with each gentle gust. Every step seemed to echo in his mind, as though the path itself was aware of his journey. He noticed how the shadows of the trees swayed slowly, like they were moving in time with an invisible rhythm steady. Reassuring, the house emerged gradually from the darkness, not with the suddenness of discovery, but with the quiet certainty of something that had always been there, waiting. It was grand, yet humble, with warm amber light glowing through tall windows. The scent of cinnamon grew stronger, mingling now with something floral. He paused at the road iron gate, which swung open without his touch. The sound it made a low, steady creak reminded him of an old lullaby his grandmother used to hum. As he walked through, the gravel crunched beneath his feet. He could hear faint music from within, slow, harmonious chimes, like glass touched by the wind. Inside, the great hall opened before him. The walls were adorned with murals that seemed to shimmer under the candlelight, each one depicting flowing rivers, endless fields, and skies that seemed to stretch beyond the edges of the canvas. At the center of the hall was a long table draped in deep green velvet. Around it, guests sat in silence. They wore serene expressions, eyes half closed, their breathing slow and even. Before each guest sat a small crystal bowl filled with water so clear it looked like it might dissolve into the air. Along the table, tall silver stands held crystal chimes that swayed gently, producing soft, lingering tones that seemed to rest in the very bones. He was guided wordlessly to his seat by a woman in a flowing beige robe. Her presence was calm but steady, and her eyes seemed to hold a depth that was both unsettling and comforting. She placed a hand lightly on the back of his chair before gliding away. The moment he sat, he felt at the subtle shift in the air, as though stepping into a current. The chimes continued their song, but now there was something more. A voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, soft and slow, like honey melting into warm tea. You are more than the sum of your past. You are the seed of everything you desire. The words wrapped around him, not demanding belief, only inviting it. His fingers rested on the cool surface of the crystal bowl. He felt a faint vibration, as if the water was responding to the sound in the room. The voice continued, weaving phrases that felt like truths he had always known but had forgotten. The path to your abundance is already open. Each thought you choose is a step upon it. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the words move through him. Images began to surface, not in the sharpness of memory, but like paintings being slowly revealed under layers of mist. He saw himself in a sunlit room, surrounded by books, the smell of paper and ink in the air. He saw his hands turning pages filled with plans and sketches of ideas that once filled him with excitement. Then the image shifted. He was standing in a market, exchanging goods, smiling as coins passed between hands. Every image carried a warmth, a sense of ease and certainty. He opened his eyes, and the table before him seemed subtly changed. The light was warmer, the colors deeper, The guests remained still, breathing together in a silent rhythm. The chimes rang again, each note stretching just long enough to fill the air before fading into the next. And, as the voice whispered again, "You are not here to chase. You are here to allow." He felt an almost imperceptible smile form on his lips. He leaned back slightly in his chair, feeling the velvet cushion beneath him adjust like it had been shaped to fit him. The crystal bowl still shimmered faintly, and he noticed the reflections dancing on the table, tiny golden ripples that pulsed in perfect harmony with the chimes. It felt as if each note carried a message not only to his ears, but directly to the deepest corners of his mind. The voice returned, softer now, but with an unmistakable clarity. "When you release the weight of needing, you step into the light of receiving." The words settled in his chest, expanding gently like a slow breath. He could feel a subtle loosening in his thoughts, as though knots he had carried for years were beginning to untie themselves. A server glided silently across the room, carrying a tray of small golden cups. When she reached him, she placed one before him and bowed her head slightly. The cup was warm to the touch, and as he lifted it, the scent of honey and herbs rose to greet him. He sipped slowly. The liquid was smooth, its warmth spreading from his lips to his chest. Each swallow seemed to synchronize his heartbeat with the rhythm of the chimes. Around the table, the guests began a slow movement. Not a gesture or a dance, but the simple act of closing their eyes and tilting their faces slightly upward, as if listening to something beyond the physical sound. He followed their lead. Behind closed eyelids, his awareness shifted inward. He saw a long corridor made of light, its walls shimmering like sunlight on water. The voice echoed gently in this vision. "Every thought you nurture shapes the road before you. Choose the ones that feel like peace, like gratitude, like knowing." As the words floated through him, he saw doors forming along the corridor, some closed, some ajar. He instinctively walked toward one that glowed faintly when he touched the handle. Warmth surged through his hand, and the door swung open effortlessly. Inside was a scene of a life he had once imagined, but never pursued. Small workshop filled with crafted wooden pieces, each one unique and intricate. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dust motes dancing in the glow. He saw himself at the workbench, shaping something with care and patience. There was no rush, no anxiety, only the deep satisfaction of creation. The chimes rang again, pulling him gently back into the present. He opened his eyes, the golden ripples on the table still there, but brighter now, as if they had absorbed some of the light from his vision. The air in the hall felt lighter, more spacious, as though every breath now carried a note of possibility. The voice spoke again, each word deliberate. "What you seek does not live far from you. It lives in the space between your thoughts, in the ease you allow into this moment." He noticed how, as these words were spoken, the guest's posture softened, their shoulders dropping, their hands unclenching from where they rested on their laps. At the far end of the hall, a set of tall, arched windows revealed the hill outside. Bathed in silver moonlight, the world beyond seemed still, but not lifeless, more like it was, listening, waiting. He had the strange sensation that the night itself was participating in this gathering, leaning in to hear the words, Another sip from the golden cup, another deep breath. He could feel the subtle transformation happening, not in sudden bursts, but like the quiet growth of roots beneath the soil. The awareness that had been distant now felt close, familiar. Almost like an old friend, the voice paused for a moment, allowing the silence to expand before speaking once more. Prosperity is not a reward. It is a reflection. You are the mirror in which it chooses to appear. The sentence lingered in his mind long after the sound had faded. He glanced at the other guests. Their expressions had softened even more, as if they had each recognized something personal in those words. He wondered briefly if they were all seeing their own corridors, their own glowing doors, their own rooms of long-forgotten dreams. A candle somewhere nearby flickered, casting a brief shadow across his hands. He studied them for a moment, the lines, the strength, the stories etched into the skin. And for the first time in years, he didn't think about what was missing or what had yet to be done. Instead, he felt the quiet certainty that whatever he could imagine was already on its way to him, drawn by the same invisible current that had led him to this hill, this house, this silent banquet. The first light found him before the alarm, a pale gold laying itself across the floorboards, and the edge of the desk where the invitation still rested like a memory made of paper. He woke without a start, simply rose from sleep the way mist lifts from water, slow and certain. He lay still for a few breaths, feeling the weight of the blanket across his shins, the coolness on his forearms, the soft tick from the kitchen clock he forgot to wind last night, but that somehow still kept time. He turned his head and watched dust drift in the sunbeam like tiny lanterns. Then slid his feet to the rug and stood, knees unlocking with a quiet ease that surprised him. He crossed the room one careful step at a time and opened the window, the hinge giving a friendly sigh, and the air that came in tasted of stone and bread and a faraway garden wet with dew. He rested his elbows on the sill and let his breath find a longer rhythm, noticing the way the city spoke in morning syllables cloth snapped on a distant balcony, a bicycle bell like a single drop of silver, a kettle singing faintly 3 floors below. He whispered good morning to no one in particular and felt the room answer by brightening. He washed his face in the bathroom where the mirror kept last night's candle smoke as a faint smudge in one corner. The water was cool and quick, waking the soft skin under his eyes. He patted dry with the old cotton towel and stood still long enough to let the feeling of wakefulness spread through his chest like warm tea. He brushed his teeth slowly, watching himself the way you watch a stranger you recognize, chin tilting a little when he smiled at his own seriousness. Then he dressed without hurry, soft shirt, dark trousers, the sweater from the chairback, his fingers moving button to button with a small satisfaction of things aligning. In the kitchen, he set the kettle and ground coffee by hand, slow turns of the crank that sounded like something gentle being repaired. While it bloomed, he sliced a piece of bread and warmed it on the pan until the edges crisped and the center stayed tender. A thin wash of butter became a gloss that caught the light. He ate, standing at the counter, not because he was rushed, but because he liked the angle of the window from there, liked how the day arrived like a promise kept quietly and without ceremony. He poured the coffee and let the steam write its temporary scripts against the glass. He remembered the bowls and the voice with the same kind of certainty a shoreline has about tides. not as an idea, but as a returning. He set the cup down and pulled a small notebook from the drawer, the one with the soft brown cover and a corner already dog-eared. He wrote a line without thinking. First today, I will walk the path that opens under my feet, and then another eye will look for ease and recognize it. I will let small yeses add up. He felt a near physical click, as if a gear had engaged somewhere inside his chest. He slipped the notebook into his pocket and stepped out. The stairwell carried the cool of stone into his shoes, and he liked the sound of his soles speaking to the steps. At the street, he paused and let the morning choose his direction. He turned right, toward the square where the fountain kept its slow blue conversation with the sky. The baker had the door open, and the air outside was sweet with crust and cinnamon. The baker saw him and nodded and slid a small roll across the counter without waiting for coins. First one's for luck, he said, as if they'd agreed on it yesterday. The man laughed softly and tucked a bill into the tip jar anyway, feeling how giving and receiving were the same doors seen from different sides. At the corner, a woman arranged flowers into buckets. His feet stopped before his mind did, and he watched her hands make small universes yellow into yellow, green against white, stems trimmed to a shared length like a choir matching pitch. Which one is for beginning? He heard himself ask. She looked up and considered the question as if it were perfectly normal to speak to flowers like days. These, she said, holding up a cluster the color of butter and sunrise. He carried them a block just to know what that felt like, and then gave them to a boy who watched with wide eyes from a doorway. No reason, only the pleasure of an action that explained itself as it happened. He reached the tram stop as the car pulled in, the doors opening with a friendly breath. Inside was the old man with the cap, who always read the paper folded in half, the young woman with paint on her knuckles, the pair who argued cheerfully and then held hands. He stood near the rear window and watched the streets unspool into pictures, laundry strung like flags of ordinary countries. A cat sitting in a wedge of sun with the authority of a king. A delivery man balancing 3 boxes and a smile. At the third stop, he stepped off without planning to and found himself in front of the little bookshop that kept odd hours. The bell above the door made a round sound, and the air smelled of paper and dust that had loved the same shelves for years. The shopkeeper nodded, as if catching up mid-conversation. Your journal came in, he said, and produced a small leather-bound notebook with stitched edges, the leather warm as if it had been waiting in a pocket. He paid, and the change landed in his palm with the pleasant clink of rightness. Back on the street, the city had shifted 1 degree brighter. Not louder, just more willing to be seen. He took the long way to the office along the river, letting the water tutor him again in the lesson it never tires of offering. Forward without forcing. Curve when you must, widen when you can. He stopped on the bridge to read the day in ripples, a leaf floating carried as an honored passenger. The sun scribbling light on a surface that never holds still. He breathed the slower way a few times, felt his shoulders acknowledge gravity and then choose ease. At work, the morning opened like pages that already knew their order. The email he had been dreading resolved itself before he sat down. Someone else had taken the lead and found the missing piece. The colleague who often avoided eye contact paused at his desk and asked, with real curiosity, "How are you?" and listened. to the answer as if answers were rare birds. At 11, there was a meeting that usually tangled into knots. Today, it unfolded, straight as ribbon. The suggestion he'd been carrying for weeks, but hadn't voiced, found the room without friction. Heads nodding, a pen tapping twice. Yes, let's try that. And the decision entered the minutes with the small, satisfied sound of a stamp. He didn't think victory. He thought flow. He watched his mind check for the old effort and not find it. And he said a quiet thank you to the part of himself that knew ease was not cheating. At lunch, he stepped out into a narrow lane where a woman sold soup from a cart with a brass ladle. He chose the lentil because the color looked like a promise and sat on a low wall to eat. The steam rose and vanished into the cool shade. He became aware of how often the world hands us texture and temperature and taste as if to say practice. Receiving in small ways, and the larger ways will recognize you. He finished and placed the bowl back on the cart, coins in the shallow dish, and turned in time to avoid colliding with a man carrying a stack of portfolios. One slid, he caught it. The man laughed and said, "That was the one with the sketches." Then, as if remembering a thread he'd been meant to pick up, "Actually, you do lay out, don't you? We're putting together a new project that you might be perfect for." He didn't reach, didn't chase, didn't oversell. He said, "I'm listening." And the man outlined something that fit his hands the way the velvet chair had fitted his back. They agreed to talk later, a time placed lightly on the shelf between them instead of clutched. The afternoon went on like that doors that had been doors yesterday, behaving like open arches today. Small frictions, choosing smoothness on their own. He noticed how his part in all of it was not to push, but to notice and to step when the ground presented itself. On the walk home, the light had that late-day patience that makes even bricks look kind. He bought a pair from a man who waited with his palm and said it was the best of the basket. And the first bite proved him right, juice running down to the knuckle. Sweetness that made the eyes close briefly in thanks. Back in his rooms, he set keys in the bowl and jacket on the chair and the notebook on the table. Washed his hands and liked the mint that the soap left. He filled a glass and placed it on the windowsill where the last light would pass through it. Then opened the new journal and wrote, without effort, a page that began with the best moments of the day and slid into sentences that felt like directions. And like blessings at once, what is easy is allowed. What is allowed expands. I don't have to hold what holds me. He stood and tidied the small disorder that collects because living is not a museum. Folded the blanket, stacked 2 books, straightened the rug, a prayer set in the language of order. He lit a single candle, not as ritual, but as company. Its first flame a question that became an answer. He sat and let his attention rest on one thought that tasted like relief. The way the voice had suggested, a thought not about a thing, but about a feeling being. Met halfway and he breathed it the way you breathe a scent you love. Not grasping, just letting it pass in and out until it left a trace. When night came fully, he closed the window to the width of a hand so the room could keep a little of the cool in its pockets. He brushed his teeth, turned back the covers, smoothed the sheet, and lay down facing the window where a single star had found the frame. He placed the simple thought again, smaller now and sweeter, on the tongue of his mind and did not move. To improve it, The body loosened in stages, the jaw first, then the shoulders, then the small muscles around the spine that always forget they're working. His breath became a tide again, and as sleep approached, he felt, almost like a physical touch, the sense of being carried by something that has always known the way. He didn't try to name it. He only said thank you inside the quiet, and the darkness took him kindly, and the city went on speaking its soft midnight language while the house on the hill kept listening. The bowl's last tone lingering somewhere beyond hearing, and yet, somehow, still here. He woke only once in the middle of the night, not startled, but gently, as if someone had called his name from a long distance, and then decided not to speak after all. The room was quiet, except for the occasional tick from the cooling pipes, and the faint rustle of the curtain as the breeze rearranged it. He didn't move at first, letting his eyes adjust to the half-light, where the candle had long since gone out, but left its memory in the air. A trace of warmth in the scent. He rolled onto his back and noticed how his body felt heavier on the mattress, as if gravity itself had softened its grip. He let the thought pass that this was the first time in months he had woken without the usual flicker of worry tugging at his chest. Instead, there was space. He turned his head toward the window and saw the outline of the city darker shapes. Against the dark sky, a faint gold line at the horizon where the moon hid behind a building. The star still in its place, as if keeping watch. He inhaled, and the air carried something almost sweet, a reminder of the pair from earlier. Or maybe just the suggestion that sweetness is always present if you notice it. He closed his eyes again and allowed the quiet to become more than silence, to become presence. It was then he felt the same almost imperceptible vibration he had sensed at the banquet. As though the night itself hummed a note too low to hear, but easy to feel. He didn't try to catch it, only stayed open to it, letting it weave through his ribs and out into the air again. He thought not in words, but in something softer. This is what it means to be carried. And with that, his breathing returned to its slower rhythm, and sleep gathered him again without a jijwen. Morning came for real. It arrived like someone knocking gently but insistently. Light finding the corners of the room one by one, he stretched in the bed, toes to fingertips, and felt the quiet strength in his limbs, the kind that comes not from force but from alignment. He sat up and pressed his feet into the floor, pausing to feel the ground beneath him, as if checking that it was still willing to hold him. It was. He stood and crossed to the basin, washing his face, noticing how the water seemed warmer than usual, even though it was the same tap, as though his skin had decided to receive it differently. The mirror showed a man who seemed fractionally more open around the eyes, as if the muscles there had loosened in the night. He smiled not out of habit, but because it felt correct in the way a key feels correct in the right lock. He dressed slowly, choosing a lighter shirt and the same dark trousers, finding comfort in the familiar, his sweater over one arm in case the day cooled. In the kitchen, he made tea instead of coffee, deciding that something gentler might suit the morning. The steam curled upward, and he imagined it carrying thoughts out into the air, thoughts he didn't need to keep. He sipped and let the warmth fill him in increments, then reached for the journal and wrote before his mind had a chance to interfere. Today I follow the thread of ease, and I let it pull without my hand needing to grip. He underlined ease, then set the pen down outside. The street was already more alive, shopkeepers pulling up shutters, a boy on a scooter tracing lazy circles in the square, a man in a long coat carrying a paper bag from which the smell of fresh bread escaped. He walked without choosing direction again, trusting that the path would reveal itself. His steps took him toward the riverside, where the air felt brighter and the water reflected the sky with a frankness he admired, as if it had no desire to be anything but what it was. He leaned on the railing and watched a leaf spin slowly in the current, its journey unhurried and unresisted, and found himself thinking, maybe that's all I'm meant to do, be carried by what already knows where it's going. He turned from the river with no sense of loss, just a readiness to see what came next. Midday, he was in a cafe he hadn't entered before, drawn in by the sound of a piano being played somewhere in the back, the player unseen, the melody simple but deliberate, each note spaced as if making room for the next. He ordered nothing right away, just stood and listened until the song found its natural end, then took a seat by the window and asked for soup and bread. The server brought them with a smile that seemed to hold its own music. He ate slowly, tasting each bite as if it were a small rehearsal for gratitude. The conversation around him was low and friendly, and he realized he was hearing not the words, but the warmth behind them. The same way you hear the ocean without needing to identify every wave. When he stepped back into the street, the sun had shifted, shadows stretching into long companions. He thought about the man with the portfolios from yesterday. The easy way opportunity had arrived without announcement, and he felt the same readiness now, as though the day might place something else into his hands, not because he chased it, but because his hands were already open. At the corner, a busker tuned a violin, plucking the strings until they matched some private standard, then began to play a tune both lively and tender, the kind that could walk beside you for hours without tiring. He dropped a coin into the case and nodded, and the player nodded back without missing a beat. Another silent agreement in a growing list of them by evening. He returned home with a few small things, a sprig of rosemary from the market, a folded sheet of music the cafe pianist had given him, a loaf of bread still warm enough to scent his coat pocket. He placed them on the table as though arranging evidence of a day well lived, lit the candle again, and let the flame's soft pulse fill the space. He didn't rush to eat. Instead, he sat with the journal open, not to write, but to read what he had written before, noticing how the sentences felt like they belonged to someone he was still becoming. When hunger did come, he made a simple meal, eating by candlelight, though the lamp was only an arm's reach away, the choice deliberate to keep the days. Gentleness intactlater. As he lay down, he thought again of the house on the hill, of the bowls, of the voice and the tones, and he realized they were less an event he had attended and more a frequency he had tuned into, something still playing in the background of his hours. He breathed in, letting the air carry the suggestion of that hum, and as his eyes closed, he felt again the invisible currents pulling quietly towards something larger, something that didn't need him to arrive all at once, solely to keep moving with ease. Morning arrived as a soft persuasion rather than an event, a suggestion of gold along the edge of the curtain and a faint brightening of the ceiling. He woke into it the way a tide finds shore Without rush, he lay still and let the room come into focus. The outline of the chair with the sweater folded over its back. The notebook on the table, exactly where his hand had left it. A glass on the sill with last night's water catching a thin ribbon of light. He drew one long breath and felt the ribs widen, the exhale leaving him lighter than it found him. He swung his feet to the floor and let the soles meet the cool boards. A small hello from wood to skin. He stood, stretched until his shoulders remembered their wider posture, and padded to the basin where the water met his face with clear intention. The mirror showed a man at ease with himself in a way that did not need describing. He smiled without performing it. The smile arrived because the body had room for it. He dressed deliberately soft shirt, dark trousers, the belt that had learned the exact hole that fit. He ran a palm down the front too. Settled the cloth, a gesture that felt like respect rather than fussing. In the kitchen, the kettle agreed to work without complaint. He measured coffee with an unscientific generosity and ground the beans by hand. The burrs making that friendly, low animal sound that always suggests something good is near. While water came to voice, he sliced bread and let it toast in the pan, until the fragrance turned the room into a small bakery. Butter broke into gloss under the knife. The first bite said yes in a language every cell understood. He took his cup to the window and watched the square breathe itself awaken, old man sweeping his stoop with slow competence. A child hopping the chalk ladder someone had drawn at dusk. A woman fastening her hair with both hands and a pin held delicately between her lips. He opened the notebook and the page welcomed him with the blankness of trust. He wrote what felt true without interrogating it. Today, I will let things come the way. Rivers arrive around corners I cannot see yet. And then, I will celebrate the smallest ease as if it were a herald of the largest. The pen made a soft scratch that sounded like agreement. He left the apartment and locked the door with a simple confidence that it would greet him later. Stairwell carried his steps steadily to the street, where morning air tasted like stone, yeast, and a thin thread of early orange peel from somewhere unseen. He did not plan a route, and the day did not require one. He let the edges of curiosity pull him along, past the tailor's shop where shirts hung like quiet flags, past the window with the dusty globe always turned to the same ocean, past the alley that smelled of rosemary because someone had planted it in a cracked pot against a brick. A tram clanged its small bell, as if clearing its throat before speaking. He crossed in front of it and met the driver's raised hand, a brief exchange of recognition between strangers who had been practicing the same city for years. He reached the river and leaned his elbows on the cold iron of the rail. The water moved with unarguable certainty toward a destination it did not have to name. He watched eddies spin leaves into slow galaxies and felt the mind's old question how. Will it happen rise? And then he watched it pass like mist burned off by simple sun. He said, softly and only to himself, I do not have to know. And the space where the question had been filled with the privacy of piss. The market, he walked the aisles without shopping, letting color inform him persimmons like small sunsets cupped in the hands of a boy who wrapped them as if they were delicate copper pans hanging in a row like moons in different phases. Spools of thread on a wooden rack, arranged in a gradient from thundercloud to honey. He touched nothing and received everything. An older woman selling herbs asked if he needed Basil. Not like a vendor, but like a grandmother. He laughed and said, "Perhaps on another day." She tied a sprig with twine and slipped it into his pocket anyway, for your pocket to smell like summer, she said. He carried that blessing as a fragrance, rather than a task, turning toward the street where a notice board displayed handbills layered like seasons. A new one had been pinned straight at the center. Layout artist sought for limited commission. Clean lines, generous deadlines. Inquire at number 14, just off Mercer. He checked himself for the impulse to hurry and found only a pleasant readiness. He walked to Mercer the way you walked to a friend's kitchen table. Number 14 wore its age well, a brass plate polished by many knocks. He pressed the bell, and a voice invited him up without asking his name. The stair smelled faintly of lemon and old paper. Inside, a room with tall windows and a table mapped with mock-ups and proofs. A woman with sleeves rolled to the elbow shook his hand in a way that registered both welcome and competence. "We need someone who knows how to let space speak," she said. He nodded and said he had been studying space lately, the kind between words. The kind that lets meaning gather. She smiled like an archer seeing a target. She slid a folder toward him. Light typesetting. Small printed booklet for a chamber music series. Payfare. Schedule sane. We value clarity more than decoration, she said. He felt the agreeable weight of a yes-land in the room. He did not sell himself. He simply placed 2 samples on the table, plain and well-proportioned. The decision moved toward them with its own legs. "Let's do it," she said. And the handshake that followed was firm and unadorned. He left, with deadlines that felt like invitations, and pages that already knew how they wanted to breathe on the street. The city had turned 1 notch brighter, as if someone had rubbed it with a cloth. He laughed to himself for no reason except that laughing was the appropriate verb for what life was doing. He crossed to a cafe he had never entered and sat at the counter where the barista drew small suns in foam without ceremony. He ordered tea by accident and liked the accident, sipped, took out the notebook, wrote, "Doors do not open because I hammer. Doors open because I arrive as someone the door recognizes." He underlined recognize and let the pen wander into a sketch of the long table, from the hill house the curve of bowls, the posture of candles, the way the silence had weight and kindness. A young man at the next stool leaned toward him. "Is that a program layout?" he asked, seeing the drawings rather than the words. He nodded. They spoke briefly about fonts and margins, the way sailors speak about winds and currents. With respect and a sense of play. "We're putting on a small recital," the young man said. "We couldn't make the poster feel like listening." He offered to sentences leave more room than you think you can afford. Let the music be the loudest thing on the page, and watched the relief move across the man's face like sunlight finding a window. "Thank you," stranger said, as if receiving a gift, and then, as if remembering to pass it on. "Come, if you like. No ticket needed," he did not promise. He said, maybe with a tone that meant yes, if the river curves that way afternoon traveled like a friendly companion. The kind who knows when to talk and when to keep quiet. He returned home by streets that discovered themselves under his feet, picking up a loaf from the bakery because the baker waved a half-cut piece at him. The way someone points to a ridge on a map and says the view is worth it. At his table, he spread proofs from the folder and arranged them with the patience of a gardener deciding where light will fall. He let the page tell him where it could breathe. He set type and then removed some until the words could hear themselves. He stacked the drafts and stepped back. The room felt as if a window had opened that he had never seen before. Though it had always been there, he made a small dinner bread, still warm enough to melt butter by contact. Tomatoes sliced thin, salt like snow, pepper cracked coarsely so the teeth could find it. A sprig of the herb from his pocket torn and scattered with thumb and forefinger. He ate slowly, praising the bite between tongue and mind. Gratitude, not as performance, but as accurate description of events. He washed the plate and left it too. Dry, wiped the table with a damp cloth, rounded the corners of the day by putting small things back where they preferred to live. He lit a candle again and set it near the window where flame could make friends with dusk. He stood for a moment, with palms on the sill, and let his gaze soften until the world lost its outlines and became shapes of light and shadow that breathed together. Evening offered the kind of rain that rearranges dust into the smell of beginning. He opened the window just enough to let the sound be part of the room's conversation. He took the bottle of clear water from the windowsill, the one that had seemed to glow some night sand, held it up. Nothing miraculous. Only the pleasure of seeing a simple object keep company with a simple truth. Clarity gathers where attention is kind. He set it down and sat, closed his eyes without intention, and noticed how quickly the body remembered the posture from the hill palms turned open on the thighs, its jaw loose, the small muscles behind the eyes resting as if placed on a cool stone, breath lowering itself a shelf deeper without being asked. He did not summon images, and yet a corridor of light arrived of its own accord. Doors along it, unhurried, and he walked that way of walking you do when you are not trying to arrive. A door opened because it knew him inside. A studio flooded with afternoon. Wood shavings curled like calligraphy along the floor. Tools that had learned from hands rather than manuals. A bench where a piece half finished waited without complaint. He did not touch anything. He simply stood in the doorway of the vision and allowed the feeling to memorize him steadiness, sufficiency, the long exhale of doing what corresponds to you. The chime that followed did not come from crystal, but from the radiator deciding to speak. And he smiled because the world had begun translating the banquet into house language. He whispered, not to make something happen, but to acknowledge that it already was. Thank you. And the thank you felt like the matching half of a clasp finding home night. Knitted itself from rain and lamp glow and the small sounds of neighbors living decent lives. He wrote one more line before bed. What is mine by nature meets me by tendency. Unclosed the notebook on that satisfying period. He brushed his teeth and admired that even the ordinary had texture worth admiring. He turned down the bed and slid under, arranging the pillow with 2 small punches the way his father had done, and lay on his side, facing the half-open window, where darkness now wore a few deliberate lights like buttons on a coat. He placed one gentle thought on the tongue of the mind, the way the voice had taught tomorrow is not a test. Tomorrow is a conversation with a friend, and he tasted it once and then let it dissolve on its own. He felt the body find the shape of sleep, layer by layer, the way a shoreline accepts wave after wave, until all that remains is the shining sand. And just before the shore and the tide were indistinguishable, he felt again that company of currents, the invisible hands carrying him forward without asking anything but his willingness to be carried. He gave that willingness freely, and the room, pleased, dimmed another shade into its listening. He woke from the first layer of sleep without the heaviness of interruption, just a subtle rising, as though the body had completed a quiet cycle and invited him back for a moment. The room was dark, except for the soft amber of the candle. He had forgotten to extinguish its flame steady and low, as if it too understood the importance of this hour. He lay still, feeling the fabric against his skin, the gentle weight of the blanket, the rhythm of his own breathing. There was no urgency to move. Even stillness had a texture worth noticing. After several breaths, he swung his legs over the side of the bed, feet finding the cool floor, again an old conversation between skin and wood that always began the same way. He reached for his robe, the fabric brushing against his forearms, and tied it loosely, the knot forming almost by instinct. The kitchen was darker now, the moonlight replacing the earlier lamp glow, and he let it stay that way. Without turning on the lights, he filled a glass of water from the clay jug on the counter, the liquid catching the moon's reflection and bending it. He drank slowly, feeling the path of each sip down the throat, through the chest, into the calm center of the body. He set the glass down, fingertips resting on its rim for a moment, as if sealing in gratitude. Drawn by a quiet pull, he stepped to the window. Outside, the rain had softened to a fine mist, street lamps glowing in halos, and the cobblestones below were a sheen that made them look almost new. Across the way, in another window, someone stood with a book, turning pages slowly. Their face unreadable but calm. He didn't know them, yet he felt part of the same scene, both of them suspended in this mutual hour where the world was neither asleep nor fully awake. On the small table near the wall, his notebook waited. He brought it to the window ledge, sat in the chair, and wrote without thinking about sentences, fragments, shapes of thought. I am always walking toward the version of myself who already has what I am asking for. The words didn't feel like instructions, but like a map left by someone who had walked ahead. He added another, the feeling is the evidence. I need no proof beyond that. A movement in the air made the candle flicker, and with it came a memory standing on the hill the day of the banquet, realizing that the mind could loosen its grip without losing direction. He felt the same sensation now, the quiet certainty that things were arranging themselves in ways he could not orchestrate if he tried. The night seemed to nod in agreement. He closed the notebook and let his gaze wander to the few objects in the room, the bottle of water still by the sill, the folded sweater on the chair, the small bowl of keys and coins that somehow looked like an altar to simplicity. These things were not waiting to be used. They were already fulfilling their quiet purposes. He understood, without words, that his life was doing the same. The body asked for warmth. So he brewed a cup of chamomile tea. The kettle's low hiss, a kind of lullaby. He stood beside it, breathing in the faint apple scent from the dried flowers. The steam rose in pale ribbons, disappearing into the dark. When it was ready, he carried it back to the window and cradled the cup in both hands, feeling its heat seep into his palms. He sipped slowly, the flavor gentle enough to fade into the background of thought. Somewhere outside, a cat leaped onto a wall, its shadow crossing the wet stones, tail curling upward like a punctuation mark in motion. A single carriage passed at the end of the street, wheels clattering softly. Everything in the scene seemed to be moving toward something, not in haste, but in perfect timing. He realized then that his role wasn't to push the pieces into place, but to stay in the place where the pieces naturally found him. That place, he felt now, was not a location but a state, one built from small, deliberate acts, breathing with attention, tasting with gratitude, moving without rush, thinking without force. Finishing the tea, he rinsed the cup and set it upside down on the cloth by the sink, the small gesture closing another loop in the day. He untied his robe, draped it over the chair, and returned to bed. This time, he lay on his back, eyes half closed, listening to the faint percussion of water droplets from the roof into the courtyard. He placed one final thought into the dark, a thought shaped less like a request and more like a recognition. I already have the feeling of the life I am moving toward. The rest will meet me here. And with that, the sound of the rain became the last thing he heard before the deeper tide of sleep carried him completely. The first light arrived as a whisper rather than a burst, thin strokes of pale gold slipping through the gap in the curtain, touching the wall in a slow climb. He was awake before his eyes opened, aware of the change in the air, that subtle brightening that tells the body it has crossed into a new day. He didn't move right away. Instead, he allowed the moment to unfurl, the texture of the sheets against his skin, the faint scent of rain still lingering from the night before, the rhythm of his breath syncing with the quiet pulse of the room. When he did open his eyes, the ceiling was awash with that early glow, a living canvas shifting with the light. He turned his head toward the window, watching the curtain breathe in and out with the gentlest draft. Beyond it, a fragment of sky was visible, washed, clean and vast, holding the promise of something not yet seen. He smiled, though nothing had happened yet. It didn't need to. The feeling was enough. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and let his feet rest on the cool floor, grounding himself before he stood. The robe from the night before still hung on the chair. He slipped into it, the fabric carrying the memory of his body's warmth. Moving toward the kitchen, he paused at the small table where the notebook lay, its cover closed, but holding the weight of the words he had written. His fingers traced the edge, and he decided to bring it with him. In the kitchen, the world was still unhurried. He lit the small stove, set the kettle on it, and listened to the low, growing hum of water preparing to boil. While waiting, he stepped to the window and pulled the curtain slightly to the side. The street below was washed in new light, the cobblestones catching the sun's reflection as if each one had been polished overnight. A woman walked by, carrying a basket of bread, her pace steady, her face serene. The scene felt complete in its ordinariness. When the kettle sighed its readiness, he poured the hot water over a spoonful of black tea leaves, watching them swirl and unfurl, releasing their deep amber hue. He inhaled the aroma, earthy, grounding before taking the cup to the small balcony. The air outside was cool and tasted faintly of stone and rain. He stood there, leaning on the railing, feeling the sun warm the side of his face. Opening the notebook, he wrote without hesitation, "Today, I receive without questioning." The sentence came not as a command, but as an acknowledgement. He sipped his tea and added another line, Every breath is an arrival. Every thought is a seed. The pen moved slowly, each word landing like a footstep on a path he trusted without. Seeing the end, a faint memory rose his arrival at the banquet on the hill. The sound of crystal chimes, the weightless sense of being rearranged from the inside. He realized then that the experience had never ended. It had simply woven itself into every moment since. Even now, as he stood above the waking street, he could feel the same current of quiet abundance, the same invisible threads drawing what he desired closer, not because he was chasing them, but because he had learned to stand still in the right way. The tea cooled, and he finished it, leaving the cup on the balcony rail for a moment as he closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, images formed unbidden, open doors, light spilling onto paths, the sensation of walking without resistance. Each vision felt less like a possibility and more like a memory waiting to be remembered. He breathed into that space, holding the feeling as long as he could before letting it dissolve naturally. When he returned inside, he rinsed the cup, placed it gently on the drying rack, and folded the robe over the back of the chair again. He dressed slowly, soft trousers, a loose shirt, the kind of clothing that made movement feel like ease. In the mirror by the door, he caught his own gaze and, without thinking, nodded. Not as a greeting, but as a recognition. This was the man who had been quietly building the life he once only imagined before stepping out. He touched the small bowl of coins and keys on the table, picking up one coin and holding it for a moment. It wasn't about the metal in his hand, but the feeling it represented. Exchange, possibility, the constant flow of giving and receiving. He placed it back, hearing the faint chime as it met the others, a sound like a small promise kept as he opened the door. The morning air greeted him, fully cool, bright, alive with a subtle hum of a world in motion. The day stretched ahead, not as a list of tasks, but as a canvas. And with the first step onto the street, he carried with him the quiet certainty that he was already aligned with everything that was coming. The street embraced him like an old friend, familiar yet always slightly new. The cobblestones felt firm under each step, their uneven rhythm reminding him that the path to where he was now had never been perfectly smooth, and it hadn't needed to be. He moved without hurry, noticing details most people overlooked, the way sunlight caught in the cracks of the stone, how the air carried both the warmth of the rising sun and the cool breath of shaded corners, a vendor setting out baskets. A fruit nodded to him as he passed. He paused, drawn to the rich reds of apples, the golden blush of pears. He didn't need to buy anything, but he reached for one small pear, feeling its weight in his palm. "This one," he said simply, exchanging a coin without asking the price. The vendor smiled in a way that made the moment feel complete. As he walked away, the pear rested lightly in his hand, not just a fruit, but a quiet reminder that receiving was as natural as breathing when one stopped guarding the gates. Further ahead, he reached the small park where a single wooden bench sat beneath a sprawling plane tree. He'd walked past it many times before, but today he felt compelled to sit. The bench was still cool from the night, and the branches overhead held pockets of birdsong. He bit into the pear. Its juice was unexpectedly sweet, flooding his senses and grounding him in the present. He chewed slowly, aware of every texture. every note of flavor, as though each bite were an affirmation in itself. A child chased a paper boat along the park's shallow stream, laughing each time it bumped against the bank and spun back into the current. The scene stirred something in him, a recognition of the ease with which life could carry what was light enough to float. He watched until the child's laughter blended into the hum of the city, realizing that what he was seeing was not just play, but a demonstration of trust. The boat never fought the water. It simply moved with it. When he stood to leave, he noticed a small folded piece of paper on the bench beside him. It wasn't there when he sat down. Curious, he picked it up and unfolded it slowly. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Nothing you desire is far from you. It has been waiting for you to notice." There was no signature, no explanation. He smiled, not needing one. The message felt like it had come from the same current that had brought him to the banquet on the hill, to the notebook on his table, to this very bench. He slipped the paper into his pocket and continued walking. The streets were busier now, voices overlapping, footsteps scattering in all directions. Yet he carried an inner stillness that nothing around him could touch. Passing a cafe, he caught the aroma of fresh bread and roasted coffee and decided to step inside. The warmth of the room wrapped around him instantly, and the quiet murmur of conversation felt like a soft background melody. He ordered only a cup of coffee and sat near the window, watching the city through the glass. With each sip, he let his thoughts drift not toward tasks or obligations, but toward the feeling of already having what he wanted. He didn't picture specific things anymore. Instead, he held on to sensations, the ease of waking without worry, the joy of finding unexpected kindness, the peace of knowing the next step would reveal itself naturally. By the time he left the cafe, the sun was higher, pouring light into every narrow alley and shopfront. He walked without destination, his pace unforced, until he found himself at the base of the hill. The same hill where, nights ago, he had climbed toward the house of silent abundance. He stood for a moment, gazing upward, feeling the faint pull of memory. There was no invitation this time, no gathering waiting at the top. And yet, the hill seemed to hum faintly, as if to remind him that its door was always open in ways that required no climbing. He turned away, choosing, instead, to follow. The street that curved gently toward the river. The water was calm, catching the sunlight in wide, shimmering patches. He leaned on the railing and let his eyes follow the slow movement downstream. In the ripples, he imagined currents carrying opportunities, unseen yet certain, each one moving toward him without effort. Closing his eyes, he breathed deeply and repeated silently, "I am aligned. I am open. I am already there." The words felt less like affirmations and more like truths unchanging, steady, woven into the fabric of who he was now. He stood like that for a long time, until the sounds of the city softened, and the only thing he could hear was the quiet pulse of the river and his own steady breath. When he finally walked away, it wasn't toward a destination. It was simply the next step in a life that had already begun to answer him in ways too subtle to name. The folded paper in his pocket pressed lightly against his leg, and the sun warmed his back. And in that unremarkable, perfect moment, he knew abundance had never been something to chase. It had always been the place he was walking from. The The story unfolds. It whispers a simple truth. You do not need to chase what is already aligned with you. Prosperity does not arrive with noise or urgency. It appears in the spaces where you have allowed ease. Every step the man took, from the banquet to the bench, from the cafe to the river, was not a search, but an expression of already being in harmony with what he desired. It is not the hill or the house that holds the abundance. It is the quiet knowing that you carry it within you. When you release the tension of needing to get there, life shows you that you are already there. The sweetness of a pear, the message left on a bench, the warmth of a sunlit street, these are not random moments. They are proof that you are on the frequency of receiving. The current always flows toward you. The more you trust it, the more naturally it carries to your shore the experiences, opportunities, and relationships you once thought you had to work hard to reach. You are not standing on the outside of your dreams, looking in. You are already inside them, feeling their walls, breathing their air, living their colors. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm, its gentle percussion blending with the sound of the clock's measured ticks. Jacob sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the golden hands. Each movement was unhurried, deliberate, as if the clock was teaching him that there was no need to rush toward what was already his in potential. He leaned back in his chair, letting his body sink into the cushions. The room was dim except for the light from the window, where raindrops streaked the glass in silver threads. The air smelled faintly of wet earth drifting in from the street below. Jacob closed his eyes again, not to force the clock forward, but to listen inward. He remembered the man's words. It begins when your heart and your mind find the same direction. His thoughts wandered to moments in his life when he had felt deeply alive, standing on a hilltop during a summer hike, the wind rushing past him, helping a stranger on a subway platform, and feeling a warmth spread through him, hearing his mother's laughter over the phone after months apart. None of those moments had anything to do with money, yet each felt rich in a way that went beyond numbers. The clock ticked again. Jacob opened his eyes slowly, noticing how the light had shifted in the room. Afternoon had deepened into a softer gray, the kind that makes colors richer. He stood, almost without thinking, and walked to the kitchen. The small table there was scattered with unopened bills, stack of papers from work, and a half-finished cup of coffee. He began to clear the table not with frustration, but with a quiet sense of preparation. He folded the bills neatly, stacking them in order. He wiped the surface until it shone faintly under the low light. It felt symbolic, as if he were making space for something unseen yet certain. From the living room came another tick. Jacob paused, letting the sound settle into him. He realized he was smiling, not a wide, triumphant grin, but a small, genuine curve of the lips that came from somewhere deeper. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "Good things are finding their way to me now." The clock answered with a tick. He spent the next hour moving through his apartment, rearranging small things. A vase shifted closer to the light. Books organized not by subject, but by what inspired him most. An old chair moved near the window where he could sit and watch the city without distraction. With each small action, he felt the air in the apartment change, as though unseen currents were flowing more freely. By evening, the rain had stopped. The streets below glistened with reflections of street lamps. and the smell of wet stone drifted upward. Jacob brewed a fresh pot of tea, the steam curling in delicate spirals. He carried the cup to his chair and sat again before the clock. He took a slow sip, savoring the warmth, and let his thoughts wander toward the kind of life that felt expansive. He pictured waking up in a sunlit home, hearing laughter from another room. He pictured days where his work felt meaningful, where he gave freely and received without hesitation. He pictured himself traveling to places he had only read about, not to escape life, but to expand it. Another tick. He realized then that the clock wasn't measuring time in seconds or minutes. It was measuring alignment. Each tick was a reflection of his own inner state, shifting closer to harmony with the life he wanted. As the night settled in, Jacob's breathing slowed. He let his shoulders drop, the tension of years releasing in increments. He didn't need to know exactly how things would unfold. He didn't need to chase. "I trust the path ahead of me," he murmured into the stillness. "Everything I need is already on its way." The clock ticked again, steady and sure. Jacob set his tea aside and leaned back, letting the sound guide him toward sleep. The last thing he saw before closing his eyes was the golden gleam of the clock's frame in the lamplight quiet, patient and moving only toward prosperity. The following morning began quietly. Jacob woke before the sun had fully risen, the pale light painting faint silver lines across the curtains. For a moment he stayed still in bed, listening to the soft hum of the city, preparing for the day. Somewhere in the distance, a bakery's doorbell jingled, and the smell of warm bread drifted faintly through the open window. He turned toward the clock on the opposite wall. Its golden hands rested exactly where he had left them last night. But as he looked, he swore he saw the minute hand tremble, as if ready to move. Jacob sat up slowly, feet touching the cool wooden floor. He stretched his arms overhead, the muscles in his back loosening with each deep breath. "Today is filled with openings," he thought, the phrase surfacing naturally, as if carried on the same breeze, entering his room. After dressing simply, soft gray shirt, worn but comfortable jeans, he brewed tea instead of coffee. He wanted something gentle to start the day. The steam rose in twisting streams, catching the light like strands of silk. As he sipped, the clock ticked, just once. But it was enough. He decided to go for a walk before the streets grew too busy. The air outside was fresh from last night's rain, and the city glistened as though polished overnight. Every step felt deliberate, as if he was walking not just through the city, but toward something unseen. Passing a small shop he had never noticed before, Jacob paused. The window display was simple, a row of antique items arranged on a dark velvet cloth. Among them was another clock smaller, with intricate silver hands shaped like leaves. But this clock wasn't running. Its hands were frozen at 12. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. An elderly woman stood behind the counter, polishing a set of brass candlesticks. She glanced up and smiled, not the polite smile of a shopkeeper, but one that seemed to recognize him without knowing why. "You see something you like?" she asked. Jacob's eyes returned to the silent silver clock. "It's beautiful," he said, "but it's not working." The woman's smile deepened. "It works when it should. Some things move only when the heart is ready to match their rhythm." The words sent a faint shiver through him, as though they were an echo of something he'd heard before. He picked up the clock, feeling its weight in his hands. "How much?" The woman shook her head. "It's not for sale, but it's meant for you. You'll know what to do with it." Jacob felt the faint hum of possibility in his chest. Without thinking, he nodded and thanked her. She wrapped the clock in soft linen and handed it to him as if passing along something ancient back home. Jacob placed the silver clock on the table beside the golden one. For a moment, neither moved. Then the golden clock advanced, and a second later, so did the silver one. A warmth spread through him. He closed his eyes and breathed in slowly. "Life always responds to my readiness," he thought. "And I am ready now." The rest of the day unfolded gently. Jacob found himself clearing out an old box of belongings, letting go of things that no longer felt aligned. With each drawer emptied, he felt lighter. The air in his apartment seemed brighter. Somehow, by evening, both clocks had ticked forward more than usual, their hands inching toward some unseen alignment. Jacob sat before them, a quiet certainty building inside him, not about how or when prosperity would come, but that it was already on its way. "The current is always carrying me forward," he whispered into the lamplight, "and I allow it to bring me everything I've asked for." The clocks answered in unison, tick. That night, Jacob placed both clocks side by side on the small table near his window. The moonlight spilled in, washing them in silver, and he sat there for a long time, watching the faint shadows move across their faces. The gentle ticking seemed to settle deep into his chest, as if syncing with his own heartbeat. Sleep came softly, carrying with it dreams of wide golden fields where every step caused flowers to bloom. When he awoke, the early morning air felt different, lighter, almost expectant. Jacob's first instinct was to check the clocks. Both had advanced in perfect unison, more than they ever had before. Something inside him recognized this as a signal. After a simple breakfast, he decided to take a different route on his morning walk. The streets here were quieter, the buildings older, with ivy creeping up their walls. Turning a corner, he saw a small crowd gathered in front of an unmarked door. Curiosity pulled him closer. A handwritten sign read, "Silent gathering, all welcome," without hesitation. Jacob stepped inside. The room was dimly lit with tall candles, and the air was filled with the soft scent of sandalwood. Round a long wooden table sat a dozen people, each holding a cup of warm tea. No one spoke. Instead, a soft, resonant voice came from somewhere unseen, speaking in slow, rhythmic tones. "Every moment you align with ease, you invite more than you can imagine." Jacob sat down, the cup placed before him warm in his hands. The voice continued, weaving gentle phrases between stretches of stillness. "You are not chasing. You are allowing. The path is not found by force. It opens by joy." As he listened, he realized the ticking of the golden clock at home echoed faintly in his mind. Each phrase seemed to land deeper than words, like seeds dropped into soil, already waiting for rain. The gathering lasted an hour. When it ended, no one rushed to leave. Some lingered with their eyes closed. Others smiled quietly before stepping back into the sunlight. Jacob felt different walking home. The city noise seemed softer, the air warmer. In a small park, he paused to watch children playing, their laughter carrying like music. For a moment, Time felt as though it had expanded, slowing enough for him to notice the richness of everything around him. Back in his apartment, the two clocks waited. He touched them both lightly and felt that same subtle hum beneath his fingertips. I don't have to see the whole picture to trust it is forming, he thought. Every moment I live in ease is another step forward. The rest of the day unfolded in small, unexpected ways. A neighbor he rarely spoke to offered him fresh bread. An email arrived with news of a delayed payment finally being processed. A stranger in the elevator complimented his calm energy. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted his walls gold, Jacob noticed something else. The silver clock's hands now pointed to the same time as the golden one. The sight filled him with quiet certainty. The rhythm is mine to match, he whispered, and I am already in step. The clocks answered with their gentle duet, tick. The next morning arrived without haste, as though the day itself was in no rush to begin. Jacob awoke to the gentle light of dawn spilling through the thin curtains, brushing softly against the floorboards like a painter's first strokes. The air carried a quiet freshness, the kind that makes you pause before moving, just to breathe it in. His eyes went immediately to the small table where the two clocks sat side by side. Overnight, they had moved forward together once again, there, hands perfectly aligned as if they had been keeping time for centuries. The sight stirred something deep within him, a wordless knowing that alignment, once found, could be sustained without effort. He rose slowly, letting his feet feel the wooden floor beneath him. Every step was deliberate, as though the simple act of walking could anchor him further into the rhythm he was beginning to trust. In the kitchen, he poured himself warm water with lemon instead of his usual coffee. He had read somewhere that the way you start your morning is the way you invite the rest of your day. Sitting by the window, cup in hand, he whispered to himself, barely audible but certain, every breath I take is an opening for more good to flow to me. The golden clocks seemed to tick in agreement. After breakfast, Jacob decided to visit a part of the city he had never explored. The streets were narrow, lined with old bookshops and tiny cafes, their signs hand-painted in fading colors. A light drizzle began to fall, coating the cobblestones in a sheen that reflected the morning light like liquid silver. As he walked, he noticed a small shop with no name above the door, just a simple brass bell hanging from a chain. Something in him, curiosity, or perhaps the quiet guidance he was learning to trust, drew him inside. The shop smelled of cedar and something sweet, almost like honey. Wooden shelves lined the walls, holding objects that seemed both ordinary and strange. Carved figurines, glass jars filled with sand of different colors, and old photographs of people he didn't recognize. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with kind eyes, polishing a silver watch. He looked up and smiled, as if expecting Jacob. "You're right on time," the man said. Jacob chuckled softly. "I didn't know I had an appointment." "Not the kind you put on a calendar," the man replied, still polishing. "The kind that comes when you're ready to hear something you already know." The man set down the watch and gestured toward a wooden box on the counter. Inside was a small pendulum clock, not unlike the ones Jacob owned. But its face was blank, no numbers, no markings. Only two golden hands that shimmered faintly. "This one doesn't measure minutes or hours," the man explained. "It measures your openness." The more you live in ease, the further it moves forward. The more you resist, the stiller it becomes. Jacob felt a familiar pull in his chest. And if it doesn't move? The man smiled knowingly. Then it's simply waiting for you to remember that there's nothing you must do, only something you must allow. Jacob left the shop without buying the clock, yet with the strange sensation that he had taken it with him anyway. That afternoon, as the rain cleared, he sat in the park and closed his eyes. Around him, the city carried on footsteps, distant laughter, the rustle of leaves, but his attention turned inward. He began to repeat silently, "I am in the right place at the right time. Opportunities flow to me like rivers to the sea. My only task is to feel good now." With each repetition, a gentle warmth spread through his body, as though his cells were leaning toward the truth of the words. When he opened his eyes, he noticed a woman sitting on a nearby bench, sketching in a large notebook. She looked up, caught his gaze, and smiled. "You have a peaceful energy," she said simply, then returned to her drawing. The comment lingered with him for the rest of the day. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of amber and rose, Jacob returned home, to find a letter slipped under his door. It was from a gallery he had visited months ago, inviting him to contribute to a small exhibition of unconventional timepieces. They were C-U-R-A-T. He stared at the letter, his mind connecting invisible threads to clocks, a nameless shop, a gathering in silence, and now this invitation. The golden clock ticked softly in the background, as if marking the moment, not in hours, but in alignment. Jacob whispered again, "I am guided, I am ready, and I am open." The night deepened, but time, it seemed, had no interest in rushing. Jacob placed the letter from the gallery on his desk, the edges curling slightly, as if eager to be handled. He sat there for a long moment, tracing the embossed logo with his fingertips, feeling the quiet weight of the invitation. The thought of creating something for others to see stirred both excitement and hesitation inside him. He glanced toward the golden clock. Its hands had moved forward, not much, but enough to catch his attention. That small movement reminded him progress doesn't always arrive in leaps. Sometimes it tiptoes in softly. The next morning, he began clearing his work table. Dust floated in the early sunlight like tiny particles of time, settling on the wood before disappearing in the air again. Each object he moved, dulled sketch pads, glass jars, small mechanical parts, seemed to carry a memory of a project unfinished, an idea left waiting. As he worked, he found himself speaking aloud, almost as if to the walls themselves. "Everything I need is already here. My ideas are valuable. My time is always enough." The golden clock answered with a slow, deliberate tick. He decided his piece for the exhibition would be something that embodied what he had learned since the clocks entered his life. A timepiece that didn't measure hours, but alignment. A visual reminder that prosperity was a state of being, not a chase. Jacob began gathering materials, a wooden frame from an old picture, brass gears from a broken watch, and a small pane of glass he had kept for no reason he could remember. He moved slowly, not out of laziness, but out of a deep desire to savor each step. By midday, he felt the pull to step outside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. He walked without direction, letting the rhythm of his steps guide him. Turning a corner, he found himself in a small square where a street musician was playing a violin. The notes floated through the air like threads of gold, weaving themselves into the fabric of the afternoon. Jacob stood listening, feeling as though each sound was tuning something inside him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, silently repeating, "I move in harmony with life. The better I feel, the closer abundance comes." When he opened his eyes again, the musician was smiling at him. Without a word, she handed him a folded piece of paper from the case at her feet. Inside was a single sentence written in looping handwriting. "Time responds to joy." Jacob folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket. That evening, back in his workshop, he attached the brass gears to the wooden frame, watching how the light caught on their edges. He imagined the finished clock not as a display of craftsmanship, but as a mirror of the energy he carried while making it as he worked. His mind drifted to the quiet moments he'd experienced lately, the drizzle on the cobblestones, the nameless shop, the gentle voice at the banquet. He realized that all of them had one thing in common. They had arrived when he wasn't chasing them. "I allow good things to come to me easily. I do not have to work harder. I only have to align deeper." The golden clock ticked again, steady and approving. When the last piece of glass was fitted into place, he stepped back to look at his creation. It wasn't ornate. It didn't boast intricate designs or expensive materials, but it carried a presence of stillness that seemed to invite whoever looked at it to take a slower breath. Outside, the city lights began to glow, reflecting off the windows like tiny stars. Jacob placed the new clock beside the golden one. For a brief moment, he thought he saw both sets of hands move forward at exactly the same time. He smiled, whispering one last affirmation before bed. "Tomorrow will bring more than I can imagine, and I am ready to receive it." The night accepted his words without question, folding them into the quiet space between ticks. The morning of the exhibition arrived with a sky washed in soft silver clouds, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath and was holding it for a moment. Jacob woke before dawn, the faint ticking of the golden clock steady in the stillness. He sat on the edge of his bed for a while, feet on the cool wooden floor, letting his thoughts settle like leaves drifting to the bottom of a clear pond. He whispered into the quiet, "Today I am open. Today I allow good things to flow to me with ease." The golden clock's hands shifted forward, slow and certain. In the kitchen, he brewed tea, the steam rising in delicate spirals that caught the first hints of daylight. As he sipped, he imagined the day unfolding, not with rushed movements or forced smiles, but with the same calm flow that had guided every step of this journey. He placed the new clock in a soft cloth bag, cushioning it carefully. His fingers lingered on the frame for a moment, feeling the smooth grain of the wood, the cool touch of the glass, as though sealing his own alignment into the piece. Outside, the streets were quiet. The air held a faint scent of rain, though. No drops had yet fallen. Passing shop fronts still closed for the morning. He noticed small details he might have ignored before, the way ivy curled round the corner of a window, the faded gold lettering on an old sign, the soft reflection of the sky in a puddle. "Everything I notice brings me closer to what I desire," he thought, and the golden clock nestled in the bag, seemed to hum silently in agreement. When he reached the gallery, the large double doors were already propped open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of varnished wood and fresh flowers. The walls were lined with pieces from artists he didn't know, paintings, sculptures, intricate textiles, each carrying the imprint of someone's focus, someone's hands. The curator, a woman with silver-streaked hair and clear, observant eyes, greeted him with a warm nod. "You must be Jacob," she said, glancing at the bag. "Let's find the right place for your work." They walked together to a quiet alcove near the center of the room. The light here was soft, filtered through high windows, creating a natural spotlight without harshness. Jacob carefully unwrapped the clock and set it on the pedestal, provided it looked at home here. As if the space had been waiting for it, the curator tilted her head. "There's something peaceful about it," she said. "It makes you want to stand still for a moment." Jacob smiled, but said nothing. He knew the clock's presence wasn't just about wood and glass, it was about the space he had held inside himself while making it. "What I create is an extension of the alignment I feel," he thought. As guests began to arrive, Jacob wandered through the gallery, not standing guard over his work, but trusting it to speak for itself. He moved slowly, listening to the quiet murmurs of conversation, the faint echo of footsteps on the wooden floor. Now and then, he returned to his alcove, watching from a small distance as people stopped to look at the clock. Some lingered, their eyes softening, their breathing slowing. A few reached out to touch the glass, as if confirming it was real. One man, tall, with weathered hands, turned to Jacob and asked, "Does it run?" Jacob nodded. "It moves forward only when you're aligned with what you want." The man chuckled, but his eyes stayed on the clock. "Maybe that's why it feels so still. It's waiting for me." Jacob said nothing, but silently repeated an affirmation for the man. Every person finds their own rhythm toward abundance. Midway through the afternoon, a quiet rain began outside. The sound tapped softly against the high windows, blending with the low murmur of voices. Jacob stood near a large painting when he felt the urge to return to his clock again. When he arrived, he saw a young woman in a pale green coat leaning over it, her expression distant, as if she were listening to something beyond the room. After a moment, she straightened and turned to him. "It's strange," she said softly, "but when I looked at it, I felt calm, like I remembered something I'd forgotten." Jacob met her gaze, sensing the sincerity in her voice. "Sometimes," he said, "stillness can tell you more than movement ever could." She smiled faintly, nodded, and walked away. As evening approached, the gallery began to thin. The light shifted, growing warmer as lamps replaced daylight. Jacob found himself near the clock once more, and for the first time since setting it on the pedestal, he noticed its hands had moved forward. Not much, but enough to know that something, somewhere, had aligned. "I am always moving toward more, even when I can't see how," he thought, placing a gentle hand on the frame. The golden clock at home would be waiting. But tonight, it felt as though the one here was speaking for both of them. The gallery's soft hum faded as the final guests drifted out into the rain-slick streets. Jacob stood in the now quiet room, the warm lamplight reflecting off the clock's golden trim. The curator approached, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "Your peace has stirred something here," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Not everyone notices it at first, but those who do, they leave different than they arrived." Jacob smiled gently, feeling the truth of her words. "Every encounter is an exchange of energy," he thought, "and I am always attracting the ones who are ready to receive." They agreed he would return in the morning to collect the clock, though a few interested buyers had already asked about it. Jacob didn't rush to decide. He knew that the right path would reveal itself without force. Stepping outside, he found the rain had slowed to a fine mist, the kind that clung gently to skin and hair. The air was cool, the streets reflecting amber from the lamps above. He walked home slowly, each step deliberate, as though the city itself had softened its pace to match his. Passing a small cafe, he paused to look inside. The glow of candles flickered across empty tables, and the faint scent of cinnamon drifted through the open door. He ordered a warm drink to take with him, feeling the cup's heat seep into his palms. As he walked again, he imagined the golden clock at home, patient and steady. Its tick a quiet reminder that time moved differently when you were aligned. "I trust that everything I want is already on its way to me," he affirmed silently. When he arrived, the workshop greeted him with its familiar scent of wood and varnish. The golden clock sat exactly where he had left it that morning, yet somehow it looked different, brighter, more present, as if it had been listening from afar and sharing in the day's energy. Jacob placed his hand over it, closing his eyes. The stillness was alive, pulsing softly beneath his fingertips. In that quiet, an image came to him, a path winding forward, dotted with moments of opportunity he had not yet seen, but which were already waiting. "I am guided, step by step, toward the life I envision." That night, he lit a single candle in the workshop, letting the soft glow fill the room. He brewed tea again, the scent rising in comforting waves, and sat at his work table. Outside, the mist had turned to a steady drizzle, tapping gently against the windows. Jacob took out a small notebook and began to write, not plans, not lists, but feelings. Words like ease, clarity, overflow, trust. Each one felt like a seed dropped into the soil of his mind, left to grow in its own time. The golden clock ticked once, then again, its hands edging forward almost imperceptibly. "Every thought I nurture shapes the world around me," he whispered as midnight approached. He leaned back in his chair, the candle's flame swaying slightly in the air. He felt no urgency, no pressure, no life, the gentle certainty that life was unfolding exactly as it should. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, the deep sound blending with the steady rhythm of the rain. Jacob closed his eyes, breathing deeply, letting the sound carry him inward. "I am already standing on the path to my abundance. I need only keep walking." The clock's face glowed faintly in the candlelight, its movement steady, its message silent yet clear. Prosperity was not a destination, it was a rhythm, one he had learned to hear. And in that moment, but rain outside, candlelight within, and time itself flowing in harmony, Jacob knew he was exactly where he needed to be. As the last candle fades in your mind and the gentle rhythm of the clock continues to echo, feel how time itself bends in your favor, Every moment is a step toward the life you desire. Every breath is an invitation for abundance to flow closer. You are aligned with the quiet rhythm of prosperity. You are not chasing time moves in harmony with your desires. Each tick brings new opportunities. Each moment opens unseen doors. There is no need to rush. There is no need to push. The right ideas, the right people, the right moments, they are already on there. Way to you. Breathe deeply now. Feel the steady certainty that your path is unfolding perfectly. You are already walking toward everything you have asked for, and what you have asked for is already walking toward you. Say to yourself gently, I trust the flow of life. I am worthy of every blessing that finds me. I release all doubt and allow prosperity to arrive. I am in perfect timing with my desires. Let these words settle into your subconscious, becoming the background rhythm of your dreams. Feel your body sink deeper into rest as your mind quietly organizes. The path ahead, the clock within your inner timing only moves toward what serves your growth, your peace, and your abundance. You are safe. You are guided. You are ready to receive. And as you drift into sleep, know that the same way the clock ticks forward, only when aligned, your life moves forward only when you are ready, and tonight, you are ready. The road into the village narrowed until it became more suggestion than street. A ribbon of damp stone that curved between low houses with roofs the color of river clay. And the traveler moved along it without hurry, letting his steps find the small music of the place, the soft slap of soles against rain-polished cobbles, the hush of mist sliding off eaves, the slow exhale of a world that did not mind being quiet. He carried a bag that did not seem heavy and a question that did. And while the bag rested easy against his shoulder, the question rode in the chest. Patient but insistent, the kind that keeps company without needing to speak. The lamps were already lit, though it was not yet night. Small amber circles on walls the color of bread. And as he passed one doorway, a kettle knocked its lid once, as if to announce a beginning. The air tasted faintly of cinnamon and wet stone. He breathed it in and thought, softly and without reason, I am arriving at the right place in the right time. And the thought did not ask for permission. It simply settled like a warm coin in the palm of the mind. The street opened to a square, and the square opened to a building that looked less like it had been built and more like the village had grown around it. A facade of pale limestone, worn to softness by years of weather and hands. Tall doors of dark wood banded in iron, a seam of light along the threshold, as if the inside were its own sunrise. There was no sign, no name, no posted hours. Only a brass pool whose curve had learned the shape of many fingers. He reached and felt the metal warm as skin. The door swung with a considerate sigh, and the scent of paper and old ink stepped forward to greet him. a scent like memory given. Wait, he crossed into it, and the door closed behind him with the sound of a page turning inside. The light had a patience he trusted immediately. Not too bright, not mean with shadow. 1,000 small flames translated into a golden calm by glass shades high above. And all along both sides of a central aisle rose shelves so tall they borrowed depth from the ceiling. Their ladders sleeping upright against them like long-boned cats, every color of leather, every temperament of cloth, spines with titles pressed deep enough to feel with your eyes. There was no dust on anything. Not because someone had chased it away, but because the air itself did not invite it. He stood still for the length of a breath, and then one more, letting the room learn him and letting himself learn the room. A desk waited a little way in, a desk that knew how to listen, and behind it, a person whose age seemed to have opted out. Of numbers, hair the color of parchment edges, eyes that had been trained by kindness to see what mattered. The keeper lifted their gaze, not surprised, as if his arrival were a sentence they had been expecting to read. A smile that did not sell anything and did not test him. Just a simple yes in a human face. The keeper did not speak and did not need to. One hand gestured with the smallest arc toward the right, an aisle within aisles, a corridor of books that pulsed with a quiet presence like the pause between heartbeats. He bowed a degree without knowing why, the body choosing respect for him. And then he moved where he had been pointed. Feet asking the floor where to step and receiving good advice. The first shelf he came to held volumes all bound in the same soft gray as morning fog, each with a small oval of brass near the spine's base engraved. Not with words, but with symbols that suggested words might come later. He lifted one and felt the kind of weight that means intention, not burden. The cover was cool and then warm, like something alive, learning your temperature. He opened to the first page, and the paper sighed in satisfaction. On it, no print, but an image, and the image was moving. A window into a day that had not yet occurred in his life. There he was, or a version of him, sitting at a table by a window, in a room that could be his if he allowed it, a kettle clouding the glass with steam. Sun angled like a blessing across a notebook open to a page that contained exactly and only the words he'd been trying to find. He watched the hand in the image move the pen and felt his own fingers twitch in sympathetic magic. The feeling that rose was not envy or ache, but recognition. Yes, that rhythm, that ease. He turned a page. The scene shifted by a breath. Now he was on a street he did not know yet, but would. Pausing at a doorway, because he could feel on the other side of it an opportunity knocking from the inside. In his chest, something loosened, a thread untying itself, and a sentence walked into his head as if it owned the place. One choose the future that feels like relief, and in choosing it, I allow it to choose me. He let it sit there, not repeating, not clutching, only letting it be true. And the book warmed in his hands the way a loaf does when it is ready to be shared. He closed the gray volume and returned it to its place. The brass oval flashed once like a wink and went still. The aisle widened as he moved, or perhaps he had already begun to walk differently. Shelves giving way to a small rotunda under a dome painted the color the sky pretends to be when it wants to make promises it can keep. At the center, a table with a surface as smooth as the back of a spoon, and on it 3 books waiting with the patience of cats, one bound in deep blue, one in a green that remembered rain, one in a red that did not apologize for itself. He placed a palm over the blue first, and the pulse under his hand was the rhythm of ocean, slow and enormous. He opened and found himself standing on a coast he had not yet visited. Wind introducing itself to his hair, clothes salt heavy and comfortable. A market behind him where he had sold not things, but something, truer ideas delivered in simple containers that hands were happy to hold. Laughter without permission, coins arriving without being chased. The sensation in the stomach was not thrill, but steadiness. The kind of good one can sleep in. He turned a page. A corridor of days walked past. Work that felt like play because the instrument he used was alignment. And the refrain inside him went soft and steady. I prosper when I follow what feels alive. I prosper because I allow it. The book acknowledged him with a thin thread of warmth along the spine. He thanked it without words and set it down. The green volume tasted of rosemary and clean rain before he even opened it. Inside, there was a garden that responded not to shovels, but to mood. Seedlings that sprang up where he laughed. Fruit that ripened when he named a gratitude aloud. He watched the future self in this book walk barefoot and unhurried, hosting long tables under grapevines where strangers arrived and left as friends, where ideas arrived and left as realities. Nothing forced, everything invited. The feeling gathered like light in a bowl. I am a good home for abundance. It settles here and grows. He did not need to decide between the blue and the green. He had begun to understand the library's trick. That choice was not exclusion, but emphasis. That picking up one future did not throw the others away. That emphasis is a kind of music that calls other instruments to join. He hovered a hand above. The red book, and felt heat, and brass, and the sound of cities at noon. He opened to a life with tall windows and fast elevators, rooms where decisions were made before coffee cooled. Elegance that arrived with the same ease as sunrise. A version of him, fluent in negotiations that rhymed with wind generosity. That moved like a river that had outgrown its banks in the best way. The body's response here was a brightening behind the sternum. The mind's response, a question shaped like a smile do. I want the speed, or only the clarity, and the page answered by showing him a calendar with many white squares. Space as wealth, time as silk, and his own hands saying no and yes with the ease of a conductor who trusts the score. A quiet sentence rose beneath thought. I am allowed to want elegance without earning it with exhaustion. And the book closed itself gently, as if nodding. He stood back and breathed, and the room breathed with him. Lamps, lazy blinking, expanding and contracting with a well-fed contentment. Somewhere a clock that did not care about minutes agreed to be audible. He looked up and noticed that the dome's paint had gathered stars while he read a librarian's joke, or the room matching his inside sky. He laughed the kind of laugh that fixed nothing and therefore healed something. The keeper had come without footsteps, standing at the edge of the rotunda with hands folded in a way that made the air around them calm. They tilted the head, the inquiry inside the gesture. He found he could answer without speaking. Yes, thank you. It is working. The keeper moved one finger the width of a word toward another corridor. Wider, dimmer at the edges. He followed here. The bindings changed. Less leather, more linen. A palette of creams and soft browns, and the odd brave yellow. Many spines without titles, some with single words like compass, points listen. Begin. Allow he let a fingertip walk the shelf as if it were reading Braille. It stopped at a book whose cloth felt like a favorite shirt. He drew it out, and the smell of almond and warm paper rose to meet him within a room that was also a studio. Light dropping from high windows in squares you could sit in like small ponds. Tools, simple and well used. Notes tacked to a board with sentences that did not scold. His future self here did not rush and did not wait. He placed hands on a thing, and it became itself. People came by appointment and by accident and left with more than they had come for. On the page, he watched the exchange of value as if it were a choreography. Money a dancer that loved to be invited by gratitude, not dragged by fear, and the quiet affirmation that had been strolling behind his thoughts took a chair. I am paid. For being exactly who I am, I let prosperity recognize me easily. He closed the book and held it to the chest for the length of a breath, then returned it the way one returns a friend to the party, so others can enjoy them, men the next alcove. Long table held nothing but blank books, uncut edges, covers waiting. He approached with a caution that had reverence in it. The keeper appeared at his shoulder with the softest voice the air could carry and still be called voice. Not words, but permission, shaped like sound. He touched one blank book, and the cover colored itself the pale gold of early morning. He opened and found, of course, nothing. A page like a lake in winter, smooth and promising depth. A quiver ran up from the floorboards, as if the building had chuckled. He smiled and reached for the pencil that had not been there a moment ago. The first mark he made was not a word, but a curve, the suggestion of a path. He watched the line lengthen under his hand and noticed how the room grew brighter every time his chest softened and his brow unfurrowed. He wrote, then a sentence so simple it felt like weather. I choose the story that feels like home, and the page warmed under the letters. A second sentence emerged without effort. Prosperity meets me where I meet myself with kindness. He did not need to write more yet. He closed the book, and it kept the warmth. A small animal, asleep hoursif. That was the way to measure what was happening past in a manner that left no residue of loss. He moved and read, and stood still, and breathed. He let futures try themselves on him, like jackets in a forgiving mirror. He stepped into scenes for the length of a heartbeat, and returned with souvenirs made of certainty. At intervals, he noticed hunger, but not for food. A hunger for water that sounded like yes. The keeper led him by a corridor that smelled of mint, to a table where a glass waited with a slice of lemon, thin as a sunbeam. He drank, and the cool went all the way to the ankles. In that swallowing, he heard a sentence, not his, and not the keeper's, but the library's own voice. Choose by feeling, not by fear. Choose by relief, not by rules. And he said inside, I am choosing with ease. And ease chose him back. He wandered into a hall whose floor had learned from rivers how to be stone and movement at once. And on either side stood narrower shelves labeled not with subjects, but with verbs: give, receive, rest, ask, learn. Charand, for a moment, he laughed again because the whole of life had been alphabetized. He pulled from receive and opened to a morning where he said thank you 5 times before noon and meant it each time like a new song. And the day brought him chances without making him chase. He pulled from give and watched himself write a number on a check that would have scared the earlier versions of his name, and felt his body grow taller by a centimeter. He opened rest and found a calendar with islands of white that were not absences, but sanctuaries. He opened ask and read the question he had been carrying since the road. The question looked at him with affection, and hair ruffled his thoughts. The answer arrived on a breeze. You are not late. You are not behind. You are exactly on the page, where your hands can find the next line. The keeper brought him to a balcony that overlooked more books than a lifetime could hold, and exactly as many as one heart could love. From here, he could see bays of tables where other readers sat, as if dreaming with their eyes open. A woman held a book that made her laugh quietly and wipe a single tear. A boy wrote furiously, as if catching butterflies with a net made of ink. An older man slept with a volume open on his chest, and the book did not mind. It seemed to be reading him back. The travel of the word fit him now more comfortably than guessed, rested his elbows on the rail, and let the view stretch him. The dome above had gathered a few clouds that did not threaten, and in the curve of it, he felt the curve of his own story rounding toward a harbor he had known the name of without knowing the map. The hum that lived behind the silence here grew a quarter turn louder, not sound exactly, but invitation, and he answered it. I allow the future that loves me to find me. I am easy to find. The rail under his hands warmed as if the building approved. When he returned to the floor, he found a corner where chairs had paired up with lamps that threw golden circles like small stages. He took one, and the chair accepted him wholly. He sat, the blank book, the one that had colored itself, down in his knee, and let the pencil consider the page. He did not force, he did not command. He remembered the way the ocean breathes against shore and chose that pace. Words arrived as if they had been waiting in the foyer of his mouth and only needed the door opened. I choose a future where mornings are light in every sense, where my work is the most honest conversation between my gifts and the world's needs, where money is a friendly river that knows my address and visits often without drama, where generosity is my native language and rest my accent. I let ease be evidence. As he wrote, the lamps seemed to lean closer, and somewhere above, a single bell noted the hour. In a tone that blessed rather than counted, he stood, stretched the way cats teach people to, and felt the length of his ribs as a good house. He closed the book and tucked it under his arm. It felt like a promise that required no oath. The keeper appeared as if conjured by decision, and nodded toward the tall doors, as if to suggest that even infinite rooms like to be left and returned to. He took the aisle back the way one takes a beloved path, noticing what he had not noticed coming in the little crack in the flagstone shaped like a lightning bolt that had tired of being dramatic, the engraving along a shelf edge of vines that had never been alive and yet kept growing, the tiny brass numbers near the floor that meant something to someone and could mean nothing to him without harm. At the threshold, he paused and turned, gratitude expanding his chest so the jacket had to take a deeper breath with him. "Thank you," he said aloud this time, and the library smiled, the only way a building can, by being itself more intensely. For a second, he stepped out into evening that had decided to happen while he was learning. The village square wore its lamps like jewelry. Soft light at the wrists of streets. He did not feel the usual tug to check a clock the inside one had learned. A new beat. He walked toward thee, in whose sign looked like a moon with a door cut into it. And each step felt like choosing, not leaving. The bag on his shoulder was light, and so was the question in his chest. Not gone, but changed shape. The kind of question that knows it is already partly answered. As he reached the inn door, he caught one more sentence before it dissolved into the night air, spoken not with sound, but with that other language he had been learning all day. Choose again in the morning. Choose by how it feels, and let the choosing be joy. He smiled. The inn door opened, and the scene folded itself around him the way good pages do when you trust a story enough to keep reading. He lingered in the aisle, fingertips grazing the spines of books that seemed to hum softly under his touch, as if alive. Each cover felt different, some smooth and cool like polished marble, others warm and textured like sun-baked clay. Eyes fell on a deep emerald volume, its title written in swirling gold letters he could not read, yet somehow understood. Paths that bloom with wealth. The moment he lifted it, a warmth surged from his palm to his chest. He felt it settle behind his ribs like a quiet fire. He opened the book, and instead of pages, there was light, soft golden streams flowing outward, wrapping around him like silk. In that light, words formed in the air, not printed, but whispered. You are the author, and the pen has always been in your hand. He blinked, heart slowing to a peaceful rhythm, feeling each beat echo with that truth. He turned a page. Scenes unfolded, not imagined, but lived. He saw himself walking through a bustling market, vendors smiling as if they already knew him, opportunities unfolding effortlessly. Each step in the scene aligned with a soft, steady voice in his mind. Every choice is a door. Every thought is a key. Somewhere in the library's vast ceiling, a faint chime rang, like a crystal glass being touched by a fingertip. The sound sent a wave of clarity through him. He noticed that the scene in the book shimmered when his thoughts shifted to gratitude, and dulled slightly when fear crept in. A gentle realization bloomed. The book responds to the vibration of my mind. He closed his eyes and let the sensation guide him. In the silence, the voice returned, calm, almost like breath. As you sleep, your future reshapes itself to match your focus. Prosperity waits in the corners of your attention. Where you look, it grows. He placed the book back on the shelf, with care, feeling the gold letters pulse once before fading into stillness. Down the aisle, another book glowed faintly. This one, a soft, ivory color. He walked toward it slowly, footsteps muffled by the deep carpet, each step matching the slow rhythm of his breath. When he touched the ivory spine, the room seemed to exhale. He opened it and found not light, but sound, a gentle rustling, like leaves stirred by wind. In the space between the rustles, he heard affirmations woven so subtly they felt like his own thoughts. Wealth is my natural state. Abundance is my companion. I am open to receive. He lingered there, letting the words wash over him, not needing to repeat them aloud. The library itself seemed to hold the repetition for him. He noticed his shoulders had dropped, his jaw had unclenched. Even the air around him felt softer, like velvet brushing against his skin. Turning another page, he saw a table in a sunlit room, coins stacked neatly beside parchment. His own hand, steady, confident, began writing on the parchment. He didn't see the words, but he felt their weight. Choices made with certainty, guided by trust, pulling prosperity closer with each decision. He closed the ivory book, slowly, almost reluctantly. His hands now tingled, as if holding onto the residue of invisible currents. He knew, without logic, without doubt, that every book he touched, every vision he chose to linger on, was quietly rewriting the days ahead. Somewhere, deep in the endless shelves, he felt another presence waiting, not a person, but a future, ready for him to choose it. He wandered deeper into the library, the shelves now curving slightly, as if guiding him toward something important. The light changed to still golden, but warmer now, like late afternoon sun drifting through stained glass. Dust particles floated in the air, slow and deliberate, catching the light like tiny fragments of stars. He trailed his fingers along the wood of the shelves, feeling the fine grooves carved into them. His breath matched his pace, and with each exhale, he felt the soft hum of the library syncing with his heartbeat. Ahead, spiral staircase emerged, slender, made of dark iron with curling vines worked into the railing. He placed his hand on the cool metal and began to climb, the faint sound of his steps absorbed by the air. Each step seemed to whisper, upward, always upward. Your vision shapes your climb. At the top, A round balcony opened into a smaller, more intimate section of the library. Here, the books were fewer, but each one glowed as though aware of his arrival. In the center sat a reading desk made of deep mahogany, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. On it lay a single book, already open, waiting. He approached slowly, feeling a strange pull, not urgency, but inevitability, as he leaned. Over the desk, the open pages revealed a scene of himself years from now, seated in a sunlit garden. His hands rested on a table, surrounded by people listening to him speak. Their faces showed gratitude and joy. The voice in his mind whispered, "Your abundance overflows naturally into the lives of others." He sat down, his palms brushing the smooth surface of the desk, and let the vision draw him in. The garden in the book grew clearer, the warmth of the sun almost tangible. He could hear laughter in the distance, the soft rustle of leaves, and the faint clink of coins being placed gently into a wooden box nearby. The scene shifted slightly, and he felt the unmistakable sensation of alignment, that rare, deep ease where nothing needs forcing. The voice returned, softer now, as if leaning close. "Each thought is a seed. You decide which ones to water. Wealth is grown in the quiet moments where trust outweighs doubt." He inhaled deeply, letting the affirmations settle into him, and as he exhaled, the book closed itself with a slow, graceful motion. The sound was like the final note of a lullaby. He rose from the desk and turned toward the balcony railing. From up here, he could see the vast expanse of shelves below, stretching into shadow. Somewhere in those aisles lay countless futures, waiting for him to choose, but he no longer felt overwhelmed. The library was not asking him to read them all, only to read the ones that matched the song in his heart. A soft breeze moved through the upper chamber, carrying with it a faint scent of jasmine and old paper. In that breeze, he heard one last whisper before leaving. "When you rest tonight, the pages will keep turning in your favor." As you drift deeper into rest, imagine yourself holding one of those glowing books. Feel its weight in your hands, and notice how the pages seem to write themselves with your quiet permission. The library is always open to you. Every future already exists here, and you are free to walk toward the one that fills you with peace. Let these truths stay with you. Prosperity flows when you choose it with ease. Gratitude sharpens your vision. To see doors already open? Every thought is a key, and every key opens a better chapter. Tonight, as you sleep, let your mind wander the aisles of your own infinite library. Choose the books that feel light in your hands, the stories that warm your chest, the pages that turn toward joy and trust. That by morning you will have stepped further into the story you most desire.